Hey guys, welcome to the Asian Hustle Network podcast. My name is Brian.
And my name is Maggie.
And we interview Asian entrepreneurs around the world to amplify their voices and empower Asians to pursue their dreams and goals.
We believe that each person has a message and a unique story from their entrepreneurial journey that they can share with all of us. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Asian Hustle Network podcast. Today, we have a very special guest with us. His name is Jon Thai. In 2016, Jon left his comfortable tech job working for a billionaire tech mogul to creatively design a life and career he had dreamed of, all while his wife was pregnant with their first child. His goal was to find a way to harness his creativity and passion through design to blend work and life in such a way where happiness, fulfillment, talent, financial stability, and purpose were all intertwined. Jon is an award-winning designer, entrepreneur, and native to the Bay Area. He is the co-founder of Hatch Duo, an industrial design and product development firm, Aggregate, a design-focused, unconventional materials lifestyle brand, and Design Bros, a small art shop where he sells his art and designs on printed apparel and goods. Jon recognized early on that design and vision were superpowers for business and life, and his goal is to utilize it to impact not only his own life, but to empower others to realize their product and entrepreneurial dreams. Jon, welcome to the show.
Maggie, thanks so much, and thanks for that intro. It was awesome.
All you're super impressive, and we're so excited to dive deep into your life story.
Yeah, let's dive right into it, Jon. Tell us about where'd you grow up? What was your upbringing like?
Yeah, so I'm Bay Area born and raised. I grew up in the East Bay. So my parents raised me in Richmond and then moved to El Sobrante, which is kind of like right next to Richmond. So I'm a Bay Area kid, went to preschool to middle school, like in the Richmond area. Yeah, growing up was awesome. I think my parents were probably not the stereotypical, Asian parents per se. They're pretty liberal. They both went to Berkeley. Okay. So, in terms of like raising us, they're not really the stereotypical in terms of like, you have to be a doctor, you have to do this, but they did sign me and my brother up for a lot of sports and activities. So growing up, I did basketball, baseball, and then I did like art programs and stuff. And I think like art was something that was pretty enjoyable for me growing up. So did a lot of drawing and painting, after school art programs and things like that. Like that just kind of obviously like led me into like a creative path and career. But I think the Bay Area is a great place to grow up. It's really diverse. I think one of the interesting things I was just trying to reflect and think back, and I remember just going to school, like it was really diverse. Like I was maybe like one or two of the only Asian kids in preschool and kindergarten. And it was one of those things where I remember I felt like really self-conscious when my mom, she would pack lunches for me, and she would pack like the Vita soy, the soy box. Yeah, so like I would have that. And but for whatever reason, like when I think I pulled it out for the first time, and all the other kids were like, what is that? And they kind of like teased me about it. Like obviously they're just kids. But then I remember after that, I would like go home and tell them like, hey, can you like wrap napkins around, like all my Asian food so that like I could hide it. And so it was just, I just remember being such a like self-conscious, reserved kid back then, where I think like art and stuff like that just allowed me to kind of feel a little more free. So yeah.
I mean, it's awesome hearing about art and how that influenced your life right now. Like it's amazing. And unfortunately, your story about, not being proud of your Asian heritage is very common on our guests on our podcast, where they want to hide the Asian culture. But we are going through a movement right now where we're owning up to our heritage and we're proud of who we are,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, a little bit different because I went to a high school that was like 90% Asians. Like, what's different?
Yeah, and it was interesting for me because like, I think I went through like different iterations where in the very beginning it was really diverse. It was mixed, right? Like it wasn't like there weren't any Asians, but there's like whites, blacks, Latinos, Indian, Middle Eastern, like all different kinds. And then in middle school, that's when like you start to get districted out. And so I went to a predominantly African-American middle school. Just the diversity is like very different. And then I think, for high school, my parents just decided that, it was like one of those things where they wanted to make sure like education wise, like I was going to like Max, so they actually transferred me out to a high school in Orinda, which was predominantly like all Caucasian, right? And that was pretty interesting to go from like lose all my friends, like this diverse group, and then go on your first day of high school to where you don't know anyone and no one looks like you, right? And so that was a very interesting transition. But I think like ultimately I always adjusted and made great friends, and it was like through sports and art, right, that you like, you find your passion, you kind of like build your tribe around that. And so that was kind of like me growing up.
So at what point in your career where you realize that art is going to be a main thing? Like you want to make it your main hustle? Did it manifest back in college? Did you do side hustle back in college? And how did that translate to you working your first job ever in art and then creating your own company now? Yeah.
So I think, back in high school, like when we're trying to figure out what college we wanted to go to, that was already where I was like, okay, like I want to do something creative. And I think both my parents really encouraged me. I think they did the very best they could to be like, pursue something like, hey, there's Finding Nemo. You could be like an animator. But the problem was that like both my parents, there was no one in our family like at all, even our extended Asian family, there was no one at all who had like done a creative career. It was like very different, right? Like, and so, in terms of just being exposed to that, like I didn't really know what was out there. So I did actually just apply to UCI, like all the UCs and stuff. Ended up going to UCI, and at first I was undeclared, and I was like, man, I'm just gonna be an art major, and funny enough, my parents were like, yeah, that's fine. And most parents would be like, if you're going to UC, major in computer science or something like that, right? Take advantage. But it turned out to be pretty good for me, because I think like through doing like the fine art stuff at UCI, I kind of realized like I kind of want to apply it a little bit more. Like I don't want to just express myself. And so I started taking classes at Art Center at the same time as UCI. So like my last year, my graduating year at UCI, I was commuting back and forth to Pasadena, taking night classes to take car design and product design classes. And how I fell into that was I just love drawing, right? And so I think, the whole way through from high school on, I knew there was this inkling of like, I want to do something creative. I want to do that for a career. I just didn't know how to turn that into something like monetary. So just, I was a sneakerhead. And so I researched like who designs sneakers, who creates Jordans, right? And I fell across this designer named Tinker Hatfield, who was an architect turned shoe designer for Jordan, and just fell into the rabbit hole of like these forums online of there's a career called industrial design. And then so I started to ask, people about it. And that's kind of how I discovered industrial design. And, at the time it wasn't a very well-known career. My parents didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was. And, but once I started taking classes and just drawing and, drawing cars and spaceships and cool products, it was awesome. So that's when I knew like I had to do something like that.
Wow, that's amazing. I love how your story just kind of like falls in together perfectly.
Your
like
childhood passion, college.
The fact that you didn't even know what major to major in, and you're like, I'm just gonna go for art and see how it goes. But it turned out perfectly.
Hey, hats off to you to major in art though.
Yeah,
because like I remember, no offense, but I remember that was like the major where my Asian parents were like, you can't do.
No, and it's funny you say that, because like like a lot of people are like, oh, what were your parents saying this whole time? And actually, like my parents were pretty supportive. Like my mom especially is very like, follow your dreams, like you'll figure it out. On the extended family side though, when they're asking like, oh, so you're gonna graduate UCI soon, like what are you gonna do? Like, are you gonna graphic design doesn't really make that much money, like that kind of, I'll get those kinds of comments here and there. But they're like, but at least you can follow your passion. So it's always like that weird comment that like always stuck with me, but at least you can follow your passion. So it always kind of felt like, oh, I was like settling for something, giving up something just because I wanted to pursue something creative. But yeah, it worked out. And I definitely wasn't thinking about, long-term back then. I wasn't thinking about, how is this going to turn into a living or provide for me? But, I think, I just knew that I love drawing and painting and kind of visualizing things enough that I would somehow iterate and figure it out.
Yeah. So. For our listeners too, just a point of reference, this is back in, what is it, like
07, 08? Right?
Yeah, like 08 was when I made that change. So I graduated UCI and then I went back to school to Academy of Art, actually, back in San Francisco. And originally I was actually planning to go to Art Center Pasadena because that's like the #1 school for car design and everything like that. But when I was graduating, my mom announced that she had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And so, so I decided it's probably best to be closer to home. And so, upon graduating UCI, moved back to the Bay Area to go to Academy of Art instead. And it worked out because the Bay Area is great for product design. So, yeah.
I think there's one more moral to the story here. It's I remember in 08, 09, this is for the social media boom. This is for before being creative was actually lucrative.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because you decided what you're good at, what you're passionate about. And that's crazy too, because a lot of times people tell us what we can or cannot do just because they have a point of reference, oh, you're not going to make that much money and whatnot. But as long as you stay passionate about what you want to do, you can't predict the future. Things are going to happen and fall into place that make it work for you. And I think that's what your parents were steering you towards too, follow your passion.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
And I think part of it too is I have a few younger cousins as well, and I have a few older cousins, and it's I can kind of watch the path and now that I'm an entrepreneur, I hear I talk with some of my older cousins all the time, and they're like, man, I wish I took those kinds of risks when I was younger. And then I have these younger cousins now who they grew up in an Asian household, but because my parents were the way they were, now I feel they're kind of liberated and they're cool, you can pursue what you want. So now my cousins are they're graduating and they're I want to be a game designer. I want to design, levels for, games like Counter-Strike, things like that. And so I think that's also part of, I had a little chip on my shoulder of no, you can actually do something you love and still be, monetarily successful as well.
I agree. Yeah. What I love about your story is, like Brian said, your parents, how they were so flexible with, you following your passion, that gave you the room and the space to actually, see what you were interested in, actually go through with, pursuing your passion in art. But, a lot of people don't have that opportunity because their parents want them to become a lawyer or a doctor. And if they tell their parents, I want to become an artist, and they bash on it, that actually sticks to their mind and their head, and that helps them for the rest of their life. So I like how they gave you that flexibility to do whatever you wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's just a lesson for us, now that I have my own kids, it's what you project, your fears, because I think parents are just trying to do the best for their kids. And again, just thinking back on industrial design as a career, my parents didn't even know that existed. So when you don't know something exists or you don't see someone in that position that's possible, how can you then allow your kids to do it? So I can empathize both ways.
Yeah, exactly. So when you moved back to the Bay Area, you were working a few internships, is that correct?
Yeah, so I moved back to the Bay Area. I pursued a degree in industrial design and a second bachelor's degree. So I was doing school all over again with kids younger than me. But yeah, I made the decision that work experience was pivotal to building a career out of this. And so I think my second year in, I got, my first year in actually, I got my first internship at a company called NeuroSky. So it's a EEG brain sensor company. And how I got that internship was I did this project for my product design class, which was a Wii brain controller. Basically, as a video game controller for the Wii back then. I'm dating myself now, but and then a designer had come into our final project just to kind of scope and see what the projects were. And it turned out they were an EEG company. And so that's how I got my first internship there. And then that basically led into like my next internship, which was a company called Whipsaw, which is still one of the top firms globally right now. And they do stuff for Google and, big companies like that. And I just really got my feet wet in just designing different products, sketching, just getting my hands dirty, working late and all that stuff. And it was fun. Got to learn from a lot of really talented designers. So.
Amazing. Yeah. And so making that transition from your internships, you started working at Y Studios. How was that transition like?
Yeah, so that transition was actually quite easy. So I was interning at Y Studios as well. That was my last internship. And so that converted into a full-time job, and it was awesome. I think one thing that was really cool too was that it was a small firm. And so they like now they're in this like large warehouse in like the Mission, but before, like when I was working there, they were in this small, tiny kind of little 1-2 room, studio. And I just got to watch them build it from kind of like the ground up, so to speak. Got to work on really cool projects like Sonos. So before Sonos IPO'd, that little Play One speaker, I got to work on that. And then I got to work on, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Skylanders, if you guys have little nephews or nieces, like those little toys, and it's like a video game. So that's actually done by Activision. So I got to work on that. I just got to work with some really cool brands that got acquired. So I worked on this thing called Revolve and watched them get acquired by Nest, which, then got acquired by Google. So, all this like design was like bringing me into this world of like business, so to speak. Right. Like, so I was having like a lot of fun, like drawing and rendering out these cool products. But at the same time, like in the background, I would kind of like catch these glimpses of like, oh, like we suddenly moved from this tiny little room into this huge warehouse after that client got acquired. So in my head, I was like, man, like my boss must have worked out something, right? Besides designing, so that, he had a piece of the pie or something. Right. And so, so that kind of got my brain started to think of like, okay, maybe I can utilize design and leverage it in a way to kind of like accelerate me to like that next level. So I already started to have like little seeds of like, entrepreneurship and, how am I going to use design to take me to the next level at that point?
Yeah, let's dive deep into that too. Like, what was that? So you have these seeds planted and you have these thoughts planted. When was a big jump when you're like, you know what, I'm ready to go off my own? And what was the experience like?
Yeah. And on top of that, like, I'm very curious, did you have any like thoughts, like challenges that were kind of like in your mentality? Like, can I do this? Did you always have that like entrepreneurial spirit, or were there like buildups when you were going through these internships and these, so many jobs, and it kind of built up that entrepreneurial spirit?
Yeah. I mean, admittedly, I think like throughout, and I still suffer it today, like I still get imposter syndrome. And even though like those times, like I was getting good jobs, good projects and stuff. But like throughout that time, I was like, man, like, I don't know when I would be ready to like start my own company, whether that would be like a firm or just like some kind of company. And so I always felt like I needed like more experience. And so that's why I always kind of felt like I had a target each time. I was like designing my path, so to speak. And so my next job after Y Studios was a company called Soul Republic, which was a startup. They were a break off from Beats by Dre.
Oh, wow.
And so I wanted to go there to kind of like learn about startups and things of that nature. Yeah. And so I did feel kind of like these mental challenges of like, well, I don't know how long it's going to take for me to have enough experience to go off on my own. So, I was basically in my head, I need to go work at a startup. I need to, kind of work in a design director capacity before I, do that. But I think, and obviously like we can get into all my different jobs that led up to this, but the real point in time that really, I was like, man, I need to go off on my own was when I was at Ubiquity. So Ubiquity Networks is owned by billionaire MBA owner, Robert Pera. And it's a really interesting story about like how I ended up working there. Like basically he shot me an email because he saw my portfolio and was like, let's have lunch. Literally gave me like an offer the same day. And so so I just obviously went and worked over for him. But, me being a Warriors fan, like, it was cool. I got to talk a lot about basketball with him. I worked directly for him, reported directly to the CEO of a $1 billion company, public company. And that's what a lot of designers dream of. They dream of being like Jonathan Ives. And like, I felt like I had that position there, but that was almost kind of like a mixed blessing, because through that, I got to like become friends with a lot of his friends who were entrepreneurs themselves. So I remember like sitting in the office one day, and then out of nowhere, he's like, "Hey guys, this is Rick." And I turn around and it's like Rick Fox walking through the office. And he's like, "Yeah, he's going to chill and watch you guys like render some stuff today." Oh. So I'm like, okay, cool. Like, so chilling with Rick Fox. And then, so kind of just like being around these like high net worth individuals who were talking about these big ideas. And one of them who I connected with, a good friend of mine, and still a good friend of mine right now, was his MBA scout who was launching his own brand called Elite Defender, and he needed help designing his thing. And so Robert and him had asked me like, "Hey, can, on the weekend or something, outside of work, do you have time to just, help out with the design?" I was like, "Sure, yeah, I'll help out." So I did, and started to become really good friends with this guy. I started to see how he was building this like business on the side. It was his side hustle because he's obviously scouting for the Grizzlies. And I was just like thinking like, this is awesome, but like it would be more awesome if I was doing it for myself, Yeah. So I was like doing all this stuff, like doing the branding, and I think he's doing really well right now, but it's just like, I was doing all these things and I was like, in my head, I was just questioning like, why haven't I, if I can do this for other people, why haven't I applied it to myself? And so it was at that point that I was like, you know what, I need to start coming up with a plan of like, that's my next move. And so that's kind of when I started to think like, okay, I need to think of some kind of idea where I can quit my job, right? And it definitely wasn't a smooth transition, and there's some kind of like unexpected, bumps in the road, but that's, that point in time at Ubiquity was probably where I was just like, all right, like I got to do it now. No, never. Yeah.
I feel like it also goes back to like your sense of awareness too. Like because you wanted to be an entrepreneur in many ways, and you planted that seeds already, you started to spot opportunities out there because you want something. So I think from a psychological standpoint, that's a really good point to highlight, because a lot of people, everyone is always surrounded by opportunities, but you yourself have to be aware of where you're going and what you want to do in order to see these opportunities. And I felt like for your situation, it was because you want to be an entrepreneur that you started spotting these opportunities. And on top of that, you took action in order to make these things happen, Yeah. A lot of times, like people just see these opportunities and just let it like go by them. But you saw them and you seized them. So hats off to you, man.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is like, it must have been such an experience working for someone at that level, and I think that it kind of laid the foundation for you to have those opportunities, and you were able to scope them out. Yep. And so, hats off to you. That's amazing. And so when you were having these ideas, like, I want to do something for myself, what was that kind of planning process like going on in your head? And like, you had a family at that time. What did you say to your wife, and what did she kind of think about it in terms of like your family and your like livelihood and everything like that? Well,
so it's funny, like, so we didn't have a family yet at that time when I had those seeds of ideas. Mm-hmm. But we were planning to eventually, have it. And and when we discovered that we were expecting, I was like, okay, this is happening, this has got to happen soon, because if I wait too long, like the ability to take risk is going to like decrease, because there's going to be someone, more people to depend on me. And so I think that planning process honestly was quite stressful, because I was pulled in a dilemma where it was like, am I being selfish for wanting to just quit my job right now and like kind of risk my income, knowing that my wife and my soon to be child is going to be depending on, us financially. And so, no, it was a huge planning process where I had to talk through with my wife, like, okay, when do I quit? How do I quit? Mm-hmm. And if we do this, financially, what do we do? Like, how much runway do we have? And so it was down to the T where we looked and we're like, okay, we have about 6 months of runway, but luckily I had some RSUs from the company, and I was like, well, what if I just sell all of that and let that be like a runway to make it through like the entire year? And so that was kind of what we decided. And lucky enough too, like I had a business partner who was also planning to leave as well. So so we were kind of in it together. So I think in that sense, like knowing that I had a business partner, that kind of gave me some comfort that like if we failed or if this all went bad, like at least we kind of did it together, and we're kind of risking our capital together. So we were completely bootstrapped, and the timing that I had actually planned to quit was supposed to be a year, like a few months like later than when I did quit. But what was happening was, my wife was pregnant, and when you're expecting, sometimes there's complications, or you'll get random surprise scares. And so I was over in Taiwan for business, and then my wife had like a kind of a scare, and so I was like, I gotta fly back right now. And it was just in that thought moment, I was like, man, what am I doing? Like I should be over back home, like with my wife, and just getting this whole thing for myself started, instead of like being so worried about like being employed and like, making sure my boss was happy, and at the expense of like being there for my own family. So I think it was just that like that moment in time, it was just like, all right, dude. So actually just when I got that phone call from my wife, I was like, all right, you know what, I'm coming home. And it definitely did not go over well, because I was just like, I told my boss, I was like, hey, I got the whole team in Taiwan ready. They're going to present it to you. And he's like, wait, like I thought you're going to, I was like, nope, I'm going home. And then he's like, wait, hold on. And so, I mean, I probably could have done it a little differently, but it was just like, when you're having a kid, you're just kind of very passionate in the moment of just thinking about, making sure that everything is okay. So I flew back home. Everything was fine, turned out. But I was just like, all right, I got to quit. So yeah, I called my boss, probably wasn't too happy about it, but yeah, I quit literally like that day I came back home from Taiwan. And so it was 3 months ahead of time of when I had planned to, like I had wanted more of like my RSUs to vest so I would have more runway. But again, we just did it, and we made it work. So it was definitely like just jumping into like cold water. And I think just the nature of needing to survive and needing this to work out, I was kind of just adjusting every step of the way through. So probably not like the wisest thing per se on terms of timing, but I think regardless, I was going to do it anyway. So
yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, we Brian and I, we hear of a lot of entrepreneurs saying that point in time where they needed to feel like they wanted to make the jump. And it was just like something that happened that made them realize, you know what, I'm like pouring out my blood, sweat, and tears for this job that, is making someone else rich and, doesn't give me the flexibility to spend time with loved ones. And that's like exactly what you did, because you saw the value in, spending time with your wife, and she needed you the most at that time,
Exactly.
And those type of moments, like you can never take back. And I think that was when the light switch like kind of flipped for you.
Yeah. And it was just like, it's one of those things too. It's like when you have a kid, and I'm sure like a lot of parents say this, like it changes your world. It changes your perception of like life and purpose as well. And so like when we're expecting my daughter, it's just like, all right, like I have to do this. Like I have to show that this is like possible, that you can try. Right. So that also was like a big push as well.
Yeah. Sure. So let's talk about Aggregate watches. That was your first startup, right?
Yep.
And talk about kind of like the planning process of that. So right after you quit, did you already have like a plan all built out, or did you kind of start building out your plan after you had quit and started Aggregate watches from there?
Yeah. So I had somewhat of a rough idea that I wanted to do watches. So this whole time of like, when I was thinking about doing something for myself, I was really into like wooden watches and things of that nature. And so I was really digging into the rabbit hole of all these watch forums and, white label brands that would kickstart and all that stuff. And so I was like, man, there's a bunch of these, back at that time, there's a bunch of these watch brands on Kickstarter just making, money, easy money of white labeling stuff from China, pretty much. Right. And I was like, but I'm a designer. Like, I feel like I could do better and make something more unique that's not going to get old quick. And so, Mike and I, like we had the idea that we wanted to do some kind of a lifestyle, non-tech item. And we knew that we're bootstrapping. So we felt the best way to do it was to get it onto Kickstarter. And so the idea of formulating what that watch would be didn't come into play till probably like after I was like full-time. I quit. I was like full-time into it. I had time to actually think. And Mike and I were like walking, I think, in SF, and we were just looking and we're like, dude, we got to think of something to make this watch out of that's different. And, you know, we're brainstorming like weird materials that are not metal. And I think we were looking down at the ground and then looking up at, you know, the buildings, and we're like, man, why don't we use concrete? You know, like it'd be very interesting to use, you know, concrete, because it's a huge, you know, in context, it's used for large architectural, you know, buildings, but we could basically appropriate it into this small, tiny little lifestyle product. And so that's how the idea got formed. And then, you know, slowly I started to spread the idea that, hey, like I'm doing this watch thing. And then I think that's when like you could start to feel like the friends and family, like the ones that really like believe in you and like really encouraging, and somebody like, dude, you're quitting your tech job, working for a billionaire to do what? Like, you know, you kind of, there's like two of those kinds of things. And, but it was great. I think, you know, we rallied, we got a lot of support behind us, and we ended up, I think we put like a $40,000 goal for Kickstarter. We launched it, and in 3 days we broke through that goal. And I think we ended with like 65K at the end. And then obviously like we would upsell like afterwards. But it was pretty cool. Like just to know that the company was ours. We were featured in GQ, and that people actually would pay money for something that we created from scratch. So that was pretty awesome.
Love the story. Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah. And it's been cool. Like I think Aggregate's been awesome because, you know, it's an outlet for us where the creativity really gets to live. Like we get to create whatever products we want. Concrete watches, you know, Tyvek backpacks. We get to collaborate with like friends like Evan from Adapt, right? We get to I get to do things with friends, like however I want. I get to work with friends and things like that. So I think Aggregate has been kind of that outlet that was always probably needed for me. And even being a designer, it's like you're designing for clients, you're designing for a boss, but like Aggregate is something where I get to kind of design for myself.
And for our listeners, go ahead and check out Aggregate. I mean, we've seen a few of Jon's
John,
designs.
for sending us.
Yeah, he sent over. He was so graciously kind to send over a watch and backpacks and T-shirts. And yeah, the design is like extremely nice and sleek. We love it. And it's just something that you don't normally see in other watches, which is, you know, really unique. And that's what I love about your brand.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah. And yeah, I'm glad you guys like it. And yeah, feel free to check it out, and happy to give you guys an AHN discount if you guys do check it out.
Sounds good.
So I'm very curious, you know, as you were building Aggregate, what type of challenges did you go through with your company?
I know you mentioned imposter syndrome earlier too, and that's very common with a lot of founders, especially Asian founders, and for ourselves too. Like we're going through imposter syndrome all the time. Like, what were your challenges with imposter syndrome, and what were your challenges as you're going through your startup?
Yeah. So I think like Aggregate is a perfect example to talk about that, where, you know, the entire time I was really afraid to fail. It's like I had my kid, right? Like she was born, we launched on Kickstarter, and I know like I felt like I had something to prove, like, oh, like we're going to make $1 million on this Kickstarter so that I suddenly provided for my family. And it's like, it doesn't happen like that. You wish it can happen like that, where you become a millionaire overnight, and it just really doesn't. And Mike and I, my partner, we were just like smacked in the face with that reality, I think, after that campaign. So from the outside, externally, everyone's like, oh my gosh, awesome. You guys hit your campaign goal and everything. And that was great. And we were proud about that, but that's not enough to like, that wasn't enough money to sustain like a lifestyle. Like we had to really still use our run, you know, our personal savings, our runway to kind of like live. I had downsized. I'd moved into this small, tiny apartment next to Mike to make sure that, you know, my runway could go farther. And so we were living next to like these rowdy students, and it would smell like weed every day, which is fine. Like, you know, like I'm not going to get into that, but for raising like a newborn baby, it's kind of like rough to have like loud drunk parties like next to you all the time. And this is like, like we were married and that was not like what we had planned. And so like, I think the lifestyle switch was a huge change and adjustment for, especially like my wife and I. Like she had to work more days to kind of supplement income so we could just pay rent and pay bills and pay utilities. And it got to the point where we realized like all that money we had made on the Kickstarter had to get put back into the business just so we could then, launch and sell direct e-commerce, like all these things that were needed, 3PL, all that just needed money. And so, we felt really good on the Kickstarter and then realized like, oh my gosh, like all that money like disappeared like pretty much, within a month. And so Mike and I, like, we got into a point where we were getting pretty tense. We were even fighting, saying like, should we just go back to work? Like, I can't believe that this dream is going to end this quick. And what we started to do was like, okay, well, we can't just go back to work because there's so much to do for Aggregate. There was so much potential still. And there's all these things that had momentum, but it just needed like money, right? And we didn't know anything about VC funding or anything like that, or how to get investors. So that was out of the question. So what we did was like, okay, we need to somehow make some kind of cash flexibly. So let's enter the gig economy and let's DoorDash. So both he and I got DoorDash accounts, and we were basically DoorDashing for $6 a delivery pretty much. And if they gave us tips, they gave us tips. But we were kind of doing that basically to make ends meet, honestly, on top of, drawing out our savings at a slow bleed, and then our wives having to work overtime to kind of like, supplement us to fulfill this dream. And so it was kind of a rough time financially during that time. And I think sooner or later we realized like DoorDash is not going to cut it. Like we need to maybe slow down a little bit on the entrepreneurial dream and actually, acknowledge reality that bills need to be paid. And so I was like, okay, like let's just dig back into our skill set again. So in a way, like design saved me because I decided to use design to freelance again. So started to pick up some clients, and those clients just basically, were getting larger and larger to the point where, Mike and I were like, oh, well, we're actually making money here, like money that we can use to funnel into Aggregate. And so we started doing that. We started funneling our freelance money into Aggregate. But then like the jobs just kept getting bigger to the point where we're like, okay, well, like we have enough money for Aggregate now. What do we do? And then he's like, dude, why don't we just start a firm? Like, so that's basically how Hatch Duo was born. So through the financial struggles of trying to keep the first startup child alive, right? Like that's how we consider it. Like the second one was born, and they kind of like helped each other in a sense. So they kind of like leveraged each other to the point where it's like, now clients were like, oh, we heard you guys, did your own Kickstarter campaign, or we know you guys are entrepreneurs. Like we'll hire you guys to design stuff for us. So that's how it all kind of started. Yeah.
Wow. I love that story.
That's so inspirational. Yeah. Because I feel like a lot of people go through that. We call it the valley of the unknown at the very beginning, Yeah.
But that whole imposter syndrome, like to your point on the imposter syndrome, it was the whole time. It was like, I felt ashamed. Like I was telling my wife, like we were laughing about it. Like back then, like we felt subconscious to like tell people that I was DoorDashing. Like we were like hiding it, just to like, I wanted to portray at that time that I was a successful entrepreneur. And the reality of it was like, dude, I hadn't achieved anything yet. I was like, we had like externally made it look like it happened, but like nothing happened yet really, like in terms of profit. So it was a long way to like get to the point we are now. Yeah.
Wow, that is amazing. What's really interesting is like, you didn't exactly plan to start Hatch Duo, right? Like you didn't like kind of create a business plan. You did it because you had to do the freelance work to funnel back into Aggregate. And in the process, you were like, oh, wow, this freelance work is actually working out. And so there's an opportunity there that we should look into.
Yeah. That's like, like the power of broke, it's like when you're pushed against a corner, like you would do things you would never do to really get yourself to the next level, but you can only get to that level of desperation when you don't have a job.
Right.
Yeah, no. And I really believe that too. And I know there's like two trains of thought where people are like, don't quit unless you have your side hustle ready so that you can migrate trends. And I think that's probably a really good plan, like honestly. But for me and my personality, and I think probably for majority of the people who need that kick in the butt, it's like, you got to put yourself into a corner so that like the only way to succeed is out of necessity, right? And so like I had a kid to feed, diapers to pay for, and it's like, what are you going to do? I can't just, live my dream selfishly without providing at the same time. And so that whole thing was like, okay, I got to leverage what I am really good at, which was design. So yeah.
That's amazing. So in building Aggregate and Hatch Duo, what was the moment in time where you and Mike were like, you know what, this is our career, and
we're never going back to a job.
Yeah, and you actually felt like this is something that you could do for the rest of your life, and this is like your passion.
Yeah, I think we're already starting to. So when I got to meet Evan from Adapt, like I'd always admired like all these different entrepreneurs, and when we actually got to collaborate with someone that we had admired, like that was around the same time where we were starting to get our first large enterprise clients at Hatch Duo. So these two things were kind of happening in conjunction, whereas like it caused us to like reflect on our life, to be like, dude, like we can never go back. This is too fun. Like we get to work with people we want to. We were making $6 an hour, $6 an hour at first, door dashing and trying to make it work, to the point where eventually we were selling jobs for like 6 figures per design job. And it was like, I can't make that as an employee. Like I absolutely cannot make that. And so, it was just at that point where it was like, yeah, let's just do this, and we'll do whatever it takes to maintain this dream. So I think it was, 2018 when we actually like made Hatch Duo official, like an official company. That was when it was like, there's absolutely no way we want to go back.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. And just to add on top of that, Evan is like amazing to work with. He's just
Evan's amazing to work with. Yeah. Yeah, he's awesome. So yeah, it's like, the ability to just, collaborate with different people, like by choice, right? It's like when you're an employee, you kind of, you definitely meet some awesome people to work with, but it's not by choice, right? It's like you're kind of put in the position that you are. And so it's just a little bit different. And I kind of just like that form of choice, that the ability to design my life. So that's how I know, like, I'm never going back.
That's for entrepreneurship too.
Yeah.
Because I agree with you. At a corporate job, sometimes you work with people that you just absolutely can't stand.
But you got to do it, right? You got to do it. Right? So.
Well, like in business, it's like you know what? There's so many business people out there. Like you get to pick and choose whoever you like to work with, and sometimes these conversations that you meet with other entrepreneurs actually support you, open new doors, or really help you grow as a person too. You don't get that in corporate.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like entrepreneurship just opened up just a lot of like friendship opportunities that wouldn't have, like, I just feel like I'm able to speak on a different level, like, cause a lot of entrepreneurs go through some kind of struggle. Like there's no clean, like, one hit wonder, like next day. And so I think a lot of entrepreneurs have gone through some form of struggle. And so you can kind of relate to that, and then like, have something to talk about and just connect on a different level then. And so that's what's been also pretty cool.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And on the topic of struggle, being a designer, I'm very curious, do you ever have like creative blocks from time to time? And if so, how do you overcome that?
Yeah. So I think creative block is definitely something all designers and creatives struggle with. For me, it just really depends. I try to just step away from it a little bit and do something else. Before the pandemic, obviously I would, go play basketball or, go out, with my wife or something, go walk or just do something just separate, so that it gets your brain out of that mode. Right. And then, take a step away from it, wake up the next morning when your brain has kind of like had time to reset. And then, I don't know, like turn on some music and the creativity just starts flowing. And so for me, it's like taking a step away and then, getting back into it, re-engaging in the mornings with music. That usually helps me. Yeah.
Amazing. So Jon, we have one last question for you. And that is, what one advice could you give to an aspiring entrepreneur?
That's tough. With one piece of, I think is to be, it's to be brave and to try. So a lot of what I hear when people reach out, like, oh, like I want to start, but I'm scared to do this, or I'm scared to financially do this. And I think like you'd be surprised how much you are capable of just by taking the leap. And so I think like bravery is a huge thing.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's very true.
That's amazing advice. And so, Jon, how can our listeners find out more about you online and about Aggregate watches and Hatch Duo?
Yeah, so you guys can find me on IG. I'm at Thai Design, and then for Hatch Duo, we also have a IG handle as well, and we also have a YouTube channel now recently that we started. And then for Aggregate, you can find us at aggregatewatches.com. That's where we sell all our gear, and then we also have an IG as well. So
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, Jon. It was awesome having you on the show.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Jon.
Well, hey, I really appreciate you guys having me on this show, and yeah, just honored to be here. So thank you.
Thank you, Jon.
Awesome.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to the show.
We would like to get to the top 10 on iTunes, so be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We release an episode every single Wednesday, so stay tuned.
Thank you guys so much.